Donc, bonjour tout le monde. J'espère que vous allez bien. Merci d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui, surtout durant un temps de l'année qui est quand même assez achalandé pour la plupart d'entre vous. Donc, merci de prendre le temps d'être là. Bienvenue à la présentation L'avantage du JD aujourd'hui. C'est une session bilingue français et English qui va être enregistrée puis qui est organisée par le Centre de développement professionnel à la section droit civil. Donc, moi, je m'appelle Jennifer Nadon puis je suis la gestionnaire du CDP. Je vais juste commencer la session pour reconnaître que l'Université d'Ottawa est le territoire traditionnel non cédé du peuple algonquin auquel nous rendons hommage en tant que gardiens traditionnels de cette terre. Et puis, nous accueillons aujourd'hui trois invités pour présenter le JD Programme national de différentes perspectives. Donc, on a d'abord le professeur Anthony Damsis, qui est le directeur du Programme national ici à l'Université d'Ottawa, puis est aussi professeur à la section de Common Law. On a aussi deux diplômés de la section de droit civil, vos collègues. Donc, James Fallon, qui complète actuellement son programme national ici à l'Université d'Ottawa. On a aussi Sarah Kissy, qui a fait son programme national à l'Université Sherbrooke et qui a récemment démarré son propre cabinet à Ottawa. Maître Kissy a été appelé aujourd'hui ou ce matin à comparaître au palais de justice d'urgence. Donc, il se peut qu'elle soit un petit peu en retard, mais on va l'intégrer rapidement à la session là, aussitôt qu'elle est en mesure de se joindre à nous. Donc, on va commencer sans plus tarder, puis je vais poser les questions à notre panel en français et en anglais, puis ils vont répondre dans une ou l'autre langue. On va vous inviter par la suite, là, une fois qu'on a passé à travers de toutes les questions qu'on a prévues aujourd'hui, à poser vos propres questions, donc soit par l'entremise de le forum de discussion chat, ou bien vous pouvez aussi lever la main et puis, bien entendu, là, vous êtes libre de poser vos questions en anglais ou en français, là, le programme JD, programme national étant un programme bilingue. Donc, sans plus tarder, je vais lancer notre première question au professeur Damsis. Donc, professeur Damsis, qu'est-ce que le JD Programme national? Donc, est-ce que vous pourriez juste expliquer là, un survol, les grandes lignes de ce que c'est ce programme-là? Perhaps one or 2 minutes as an introduction. What is the national program and what does it entail?
Oui, avec plaisir. So in 1 or 2 minutes, I would say this is an 8-month program where you will take all your courses in the common law faculty. All your courses must be common law courses, and that's important. But you receive a JD. From my perspective, this is one of the special benefits of having this faculty and this program. Students from droit civil get to pick up another law degree in 8 months. I mean, that is not something that other places in the world have. And it's not just any extra law degree. It's a JD from a Canadian law faculty. As someone who has worked internationally, I can tell you Canadian lawyers are highly respected. And to have a JD from the University of Ottawa is something. The fact that you can get it in 8 months is a benefit to you. Consequently, though, we do really immerse you in the common law. We do everything we can in those 8 months to get you to really start thinking the way common law lawyers think. Because if you don't understand the way common law lawyers think, you can have 10 JDs next to your name, but you will not ever be accepted by common law lawyers, because the moment you're not using the same language, or at least familiar with the language of the common law, lawyers are a very conservative bunch. They don't like risk. And if they're dealing with someone with whom they have some questions about the veracity of their knowledge, it's not going to help you in the long term. So we know this, and we really do try to equip you with everything you'll need to become part of a common law environment. So that's kind of big lines.
Excellent. And we're going to drill down a little bit more in detail about some of those aspects during the course of this session. So thank you so much for that overview. James, the next question goes to you. We'd love to hear a little bit more about some motivations that students might have for pursuing a JD degree. Donc, de votre perspective, James, en tant que diplômé de la section de droit civil, à quel moment pendant vos études de votre licence est-ce que vous avez décidé de poursuivre un JD? Quelles étaient vos motivations là, pour faire demande?
So yeah, I prepared some responses there, but I'm going to try to be as candid as possible. So I decided to do the JD almost immediately as soon as I got into the civil law program, and that was because, I wanted a bijural education. I knew that Ottawa was the place to do it. Sort of a very well-recognized university in Ontario and the rest of Canada. And I just being an Anglophone, I thought it was just the most practical thing to do. To give me the most options. And that's about it. So it's really just about the reputation and having the option to work in both languages.
Merci, James. And Professor Damesis, do you have anything to add about perhaps other motivations that students might have for choosing this path?
Yes, well, the obvious ones would be, to pick up on what James said, to expand your options. When you have a droit civil degree, certainly you can work in Quebec. When you have a JD, you can work anywhere in North America. Our JD is recognized in the US, and most bars in the US allow you to write their bar, especially the New York bar, which is one of the bars that many Canadians seek to join for a variety of reasons. So it really does open up. I can tell you from my perspective, I'm a dual degreed lawyer, and when I was working in Europe, it would blow their minds that I could communicate with counsel from France, Switzerland, Germany, and then communicate with counsel in England. No, European lawyers just don't have that ability. So when common law lawyers would talk about contract formation, for example, the word consideration always comes up. Now, consideration is meaningless to most civilian lawyers, just like causa is pretty much irrelevant to the way the common law mind speaks of contracts. And so I was very easily able to maneuver and draw the parallels to make everybody comfortable. That gave me a heck of a lot of job security, I can tell you. So not only does having both degrees open opportunities, I would go so far as to say it lets you keep those opportunities, because very quickly people realize that somebody who understands both systems becomes quite indispensable, at least if you're in a firm that has these cross-border and cross-legal cultural requirements. So that may be another motivation for you. And I'll give you a minor motivation, although it's quite practical, especially for maybe the younger folk out there. As you probably know, the way the JD is built is there is an expectation of having an undergraduate degree. Consequently, JD graduates tend to be older than droit civil graduates. And so again, on the marketplace, having a 22-year-old lawyer giving advice to businesses is not often something people are, the most delicate way I can put it is quick to want. So this gives you another year to become a little more seasoned, perhaps to have a few gray hairs from all the stress of law school, and therefore to get on the market with maybe closer to what people expect newly minted lawyers to look like.
Great. And I think that actually transitions well into a follow-up question that I might have about, about entering the job market with your civil law training and your common law training. and the advantage or potential advantages of doing that, as opposed to, and some students here might have heard of a recent decision by the Law Society of Ontario to recognize the credentials of lawyers who are certified to practice in the province of Quebec. And so they've recently simplified the process for lawyers who are already certified to practice in Quebec in order to transfer those credentials to be able to practice in Ontario without necessarily having to obtain a JD prior to doing that. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that, Professor Damesis, and sort of to the potential advantages of still getting that JD prior to practicing in a common law jurisdiction.
Yes, I'm happy to. And I think there are two questions in what you've asked me. So let me deal with each in turn. The first is job market. And to the extent that, and I think it's a very fair question to ask, that how do law firms perceive somebody who has received a JD in 8 months? I think that's a very fair question to ask. And James knows me because he's in my contracts class right now. Many of you probably don't know me well, but I just say it like it is. So here it is. I think a firm whose only practice area is something narrow and entirely Ontario, in other words, just family law files in Ontario. In other words, they have no need for somebody who has done 3 years of droit civil. They are on balance going to go with somebody who is more the traditional JD, the 3-year JD, because for them, all you know is Ontario. You don't know anything else, and they're very happy with that. So there are some firms that will say, ooh, this may be a wild card. We've heard good things, but on balance, there are plenty of candidates who've done JD in 3 years. The firms you want to approach are the ones who either deal internationally, which many of our, and internationally just means the US, and interprovincially. And of course, Ottawa is a great place for that. We have a lot of Gatineau, Hull, Ottawa worlds that collide. And it's why local firms are very attracted to our dual, because if you walk in as a dually, not just studied, degreed, but also licensed lawyer, well, suddenly their practice expands. They can now actually take cases where there's a Quebec party or Quebec laws involved. So there are plenty of firms here that love that. And there are plenty of firms in Toronto that like the interprovincial and international, basically doors that open with this degree. So job market wise, it is slightly different. And I always tell students, when you're going for a job, you must go to your advantage, right? I'm a big believer in economic aspects of a lot of how we think about the world. One of them is your comparative advantage, being a dual degreed lawyer or dual degreed candidate, is that you are able to understand the other way other lawyers think about anything, not just contracts, but even family law, frankly. And to the extent that that is something that brings value to a firm, they should want it. And I'd even go so far as to say some firms don't even understand the value added you can bring by opening up other avenues. And these days, it's a tight market. Law firms want new areas. So job market, it is different, but it is by no means restricted. It's really just a matter of how you position yourself for those jobs. So that was the first question. The second question relates to this new issue where the Barreau du Québec and Ontario and all the other law societies have finally ratified this agreement for interprovincial practice with basically no restrictions, at least from Quebec lawyers coming to Ontario. There are actually restrictions from Ontario lawyers going to Quebec, which is ironic. Here's my take on it. I think at first people would say, oh my goodness, well, why do I need to go and do a JD? I have tons of reasons, but I'll limit myself to a couple. First, in my view, this agreement was really intended for a particular type of individual, a very senior lawyer who, for political or business reasons, needs to also say he or she is a lawyer in Ontario. And the expectation is that person isn't really practicing day to day in Ontario. That would be my first perspective. But of course, the rule doesn't say that. It doesn't say you have to be a senior lawyer and you're not really going to do much work. It doesn't. It's carte blanche. You can be like everyone else and a license like an Ontario lawyer. So here's why, at least, I'm not at all worried about this. As someone who's also taught professional responsibility, our ethics, I know that you are not allowed to give advice or practice if you don't really know what you're doing, even if you have a license. In other words, if you're a specialist in contract law and you don't really know tort law, the last thing you should be doing is giving advice on tort law. That would be a breach of one of our basic and fundamental rules, what we call our rule of competency. So to me, a Quebec lawyer who has never taken a course in Ontario law or common law is A, not competent to give any advice on it, and B, would be negligent to do so. And so I actually think this is going to be a boon for our faculty, because I'm very happy if a bunch of Quebec lawyers come and get their license, because I expect, and I'm very confident that they believe in their own ethics as well, they'll realize I can't just tomorrow start giving advice on contract law or any of these other, I need to learn this stuff. And that's where we're here to accommodate them. I mean, James, I've pointed out, James is currently in our contracts class, so I'll ask James, and answer as honestly, please don't, this doesn't count towards your grade. So would you say that just contract law, from what we have seen, is remarkably different than what you learned in droit des obligations during your droit civil?
Well, I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, there's no common law code civil. Nothing is very definite or precise. Not in the code civil, everything is very categorized. In common law contracts, especially, everything is very fluid. It's learning through the cases, being able to isolate the rule of a case, and being able to really, tie everything together on your own, like seeing it all very conceptually as opposed to very definite. There's no I would feel like a fish out of water if I tried to, with my not knowing anything about contracts and just thinking about my code civil. It's not enough to know, a case name or an article when you're doing common law contracts. You have to know the facts, right?
Yeah, no, and that's just one area. We also have tort. We have all these other areas. So that new agreement, as I said, I think it has its benefits for people who really just need to maybe signal to their clients that they are a lawyer in Ontario. I mean, I can imagine a Quebec corporation that is now opening up shop in Ontario, and they have their general counsel. Well, people will feel a lot better if that general counsel, who was a Quebec lawyer, is now also deemed an Ontario lawyer as they open up shop in Ontario. I would hope, however, that that general counsel, when a legal issue arises, hires local counsel to help them, because otherwise that, in my view, would be negligent. So I don't know. I hope that answers the question.
Definitely. And we do have a question from Yulia, and I'll turn it to you in a second. But I'm wondering, just before we go to the question, James, you've opened up this can of worms already in how learning contracts has differed a little bit from your experience learning the Code Civil. I'm wondering if you can expand on that and share with us how your experience in general studying in the national program is different and unique compared to studying in droit civil.
Well, yeah, it's a very broad question, but I'll try to narrow it down. So, like I was saying with contracts, right? When you open up the Code Civil, your teacher will assign sometimes, let's say, in the civil law program, they'll assign, let's say, 20 articles. You read them, everything is very definite, clean cut, precise. You get, answer A, and a lot of the application is just based on what's in the code. So as long as the code is, you're fine in the code, you can solve the problem. And I think in a lot of common law, like not just contracts, but in torts and all these things, you really have to consider, the common law, things that are a bit less precise. So studying becomes, and because everything isn't in like a code civil, like for example, if you want to learn anything about prescription in common law, you have to go to the Limitations Act, or anything about, for example, what to do when someone is incapacitated. There's a Substitute Decisions Act, as opposed to going into the book on family law or the book on prescription. So those are sort of fundamental things without rambling on too much. But it's really just about having to reflect a little more on the facts and applying more loose principles. And I think on the program in general, I've enjoyed it a lot, but it's just a lot of time, reading and rereading cases as opposed to reading and rereading articles. And nothing is ever definite. Everything is gray all the time. So, anyways, that's my short answer. But I have other things to say, but I don't want to dump it all in one shot. So.
Thank you so much, James. Just a little bit different, just a tiny little bit, right? Yulia, we'll go with your question. Allez-y.
Bonjour. Merci beaucoup de prendre le temps de répondre à nos questions aujourd'hui. Moi, je suis une étudiante en 3e année, puis j'ai l'intention de m'inscrire au GD l'année prochaine. C'est pas mal certain, en fait. Donc, je suis plus là pour recueillir le plus d'informations possible avant de commencer le programme. Ma question porte justement en lien avec le barreau de l'Ontario puis la pratique suite au GD. Est-ce qu'avec la nouvelle législation, en fait, en lien avec ça, est-ce qu'il faut quand même passer l'examen du barreau de l'Ontario après avoir obtenu notre GD pour pouvoir pratiquer?
Well, as I understand it, if you are called to the Quebec Bar, so it's not just having done your degree in droit civil, you have to be a lawyer in Quebec. You don't have to pass the Ontario exams. And that's in contrast to Ontario lawyers who want to become a member of the Barreau du Québec. They must, I believe it's 4 exams. All the Ontario Law Society asks of you as a Quebec lawyer is, and I hope at least they give you the materials, but they say, become familiar with them. In other words, it's on you. You have no guidance, you have no course, and you have no test. So it's on you to become familiar. Now, I think, with all due respect to the Law Society, this is really getting close to the line of itself being negligent. The purpose of a law society is to protect society from lawyers, and if you want to put it in such blunt terms. They give us a license because what they're basically saying is, we confirm this individual can offer you good advice. And how do they know that? Well, you get your JD, you then write the bar exams. And from their perspective, if you pass these bar exams, that's an objective standard. Now they're simply saying, go ahead, we just trust you to become familiar. But they don't tell you, what does that mean? It's why I think having tests, not just for the sake of taking tests, but it offers an objective standard, not just for the public, but for you. You may think that you're familiar because it's very easy to read something and say, well, I guess that makes sense. But then when somebody puts it in the form of a question, that's when you really figure out, do I really know this? And so that's my kind of concern, which is why I hope the thinking is more that it's for a certain type of individual who is probably not really going to be practicing, but it's still helpful to be a lawyer. But that's just my opinion, and I'm sure I'm not completely right. But I hope that answers your question. Although I think another part of your question is, realistically, can you just transfer and work? And I don't think realistically that can happen. I think what you could do is do your degree and then work, because at least you'll have 8 months of us telling you, hey, this is how to think. This is how common law approaches it. So that when you walk into a court, together with your experience as a Quebec lawyer, you can put those pieces together. Of course, like any law degree, we have exams. So you'll know if you're getting it or not.
Ça répond. Thank you so much. I'm doing the GD more because I'd like to work for like a judge. as a clerk eventually. So that's why I'm doing my GD, to get that perspective and that knowledge. I'm not really planning necessarily on working in another province, but we never know. That's why I asked. Thank you so much.
And as a judge, it's so important. If you guys have been reading the latest decisions from our Supreme Court of Canada, now that Justice Kassirer is there in particular, we're seeing a lot more cross-pollination between droit civil thinking and common law thinking. So again, it's another reason why somebody who actually appreciates both can help, so you can help judges, but also as a jurist point out where now you're in the world of false friends, where you might think it's the same, it's not, so you really have to be clean about the way you're analyzing something.
Merci, Yulia, pour votre question. Puis oui, c'est sûr que si vous planifiez travailler auprès d'un juge de juridiction fédérale, la Cour fédérale, la Cour suprême du Canada, il y a certainement une énorme pertinence là, à obtenir des connaissances dans les deux secteurs, dans les deux juridictions. Donc, peut-être qu'on peut relancer à James. James, if you could perhaps expand a little bit on your experience to date. So you've already talked a little bit about it. Maybe in terms of what you appreciate the most about your experience so far. I know it's only been a few short months, but I'm sure you've learned an incredible amount of information so far, even though it's been a short time. What do you appreciate the most, and what are some challenges you've encountered, or some more difficult aspects of studying in the national program?
Well, I think without getting back into sort of the discussion of the whole civil code aspect, the things that I've enjoyed the most are, well, I mean, I have to go back into the civil code aspect, but what I've enjoyed is really debating with professors, having this opportunity to really have a certain flexibility. Like, I don't, maybe some civil law students don't really understand, but you know, things are not so definite in common law, so you can really have a good argument, multiple good arguments at any given time. So having that debate and that back and forth of like, you know, okay, it could be this or could be that is really, I think it's really nice, you know, that it's less restrictive, and also getting onto the more global idea of the program itself. It's, you know, it's really great because you get to touch on, you get so many, you know, optional courses to do and all that. Like I took a negotiation course, or I'm currently taking a negotiation course, and I got to participate in the Denton's competition. I got to meet a whole bunch of people. You know, I'm taking other optional courses like real estate, and you know, everything that's a lot of really practical courses that are really enriching. So I think on the whole, it's the you know, appreciating the common law for the way it is, and also the program because it offers so many opportunities, you know, to do other courses other than like, you know, black letter law and you know, a lot of very practical things. And I think the challenge on the whole is mainly that everything is so condensed that a lot of courses like that would normally be full year courses in common law are now condensed into one course. And I do get the sense that some teachers have, like, you know, curated the course and cut it down, but other courses, you know, simply can't be cut down. But it's not a huge issue. Like, I wouldn't say that I feel like courses are being condensed like 2 into 1 or like a full year course, because a lot of it is cut out. I just feel like there's a lot, like any other law program. They're just, you know, it's fairly condensed, but that's not really a downside to me. So it's just a bit more work and a bit more you know, conscientiousness on the students' part. But and apart from that, oh yeah, like a third thing that I really like about the program, and this is also not a knock on droit civil, but I find that the CDP and common law is a bit larger, and they provide a bit more, you know, a bit more of a resource. Like the source, for example, is like an online database with, you know, a bunch of employers and job opportunities, and you know, skill development seminars that have been recorded, helpful documents. So you as a common law student, you know, looking for a job, already have, you know, like a database. You have like a professionals. You have people really guiding you into whatever it is you really want to do. And you know, just that, you know, droit civil does that as well. Just that I find the source is a very, very convenient way that focuses all of these things, you know, to one area. So yeah, it's really those three things. It's the ability to debate. It's the you know, course opportunities, experiential learning, you know, and events like the debate competition, and and then career development like the Source and professionals like Jennifer.
Yeah, certainly. And some of you know already that I worked on the career and professional development team in the common law section before joining the droit civil section. I can attest to the fact that it's very different experience coming from a 6 or 7 person team and sort of to a 2-person team. So me and Valerie, we're making this happen. There's amazing resources at your disposal. Even though there's just 2 of us here, we are working really, really hard. But yes, certainly there's a huge advantage of being part of a larger team and having, more students, more resources available to you. So thank you so much, James, for pointing that out. And I noticing that Sarah has not been able to join us yet, but I'm hoping that she can a little bit later to weigh in on her perspective at Sherbrooke. Maybe in the meantime, we can switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the practicalities of the program. Maybe Professor Damsis, you can speak to the course sequence, maybe some practical opportunities or experiential learning opportunities that James just touched on with the negotiation competition that he's taken part in. What are some opportunities and advantages of studying in this very condensed program?
Sure. Well, of course, we have mandatory courses from which you cannot opt out. And those would be our bread and butter JD courses, very much resembling Section 92 areas that the Law Society deems mandatory. So contract law, torts, civil procedure, property law. What am I forgetting, James? There's one more.
Is there a professional responsibility?
Professional responsibility, yeah.
I checked, sorry.
Right. And the reason those are mandatory is that they differ from droit civil. So it's important that you do understand those differences. As far as the other opportunities go, you then get 12 to 15 extra credits to do with as you wish. So that can be in the form of taking courses, which is, I think, the usual form. And then you have access to, we are the largest law faculty in the country, in the JD world. And I'm pretty sure that also would include droit civil world. And as a consequence, we have more courses than anyone else. So you really get to choose areas that could interest you. We have certain strengths. For international law is one, IP law is another. We have a lot of specialties. So if one of those areas interests you, you can take a course in it. You can always, as James mentioned, take either directed research or student proposed internship. So what is that? That is an opportunity where we have a bunch of them already preset, but you can go and find your own. But essentially, it's you get to work either in a law firm, with a lawyer, in government. Basically, it's a placement, and you get course credit for that placement. And it's a great way to get hands-on experience and maybe even develop a few contacts. This year's course, or this year's cohort, I think I've approved nearly a dozen of these. So a lot of our students are taking advantage of that. And I think it's an area that our students love. You also have access to our mooting program, which is world-class, which means you get the opportunity to get some training that people around the world wish they could get. So you get access to that. So I would say those were some other aspects of this program. For example, and I don't want to knock any other law faculties that also have a JD offering, but I will draw what I think is an important distinction. Most other faculties who offer that program, it is a droit civil faculty or faculty of droit civil who then has hired some people, some part-timers often, to teach a course in JD, which means you are learning the JD in a droit civil environment, in my opinion. We're the opposite. We are a JD faculty, and you're coming to a JD faculty to learn. And our profs are people who teach this in the JD program. And so people know us in the workplace, you know, when somebody, and often in interviews, you may have already noticed this, that in an interview, somebody will look at courses you've taken and maybe they're from the same university and might say, oh, who do you have as your prof? Well, in our case, it's people know us. So it could be, oh yeah, Damesis, isn't he a jerk? You know, no, hopefully they don't say that, but it could be stuff like that. Whereas I think in some of these other programs, they're not really known. Doesn't mean they're not great, but they're just not known. And I think that makes a difference.
Excellent, thank you. Donc, j'ai quelques petites questions qui me viennent directement. Merci pour vos questions. Les participants, vous êtes quand même très engagés aujourd'hui. Je note que vous avez plusieurs questions qui est excellent. Donc, des questions en rapport avec l'admission au programme national. Donc, est-ce que vous pouvez parler plus spécifiquement des dates limites pour postuler, par exemple, ou pour envoyer sa demande d'admission, ainsi que les critères d'admission ou les critères d'admissibilité au programme pour les étudiants qui viennent de la licence?
Oui, avec plaisir. Alors, in a way, it's very easy. It is a rolling application process. We open in December. And so I've looked at my calendar here. It looks like Wednesday is the 1st of December, which means you can put in your application as early as December. And if you've done your licence here at Ottawa, you don't have to pay a fee. You don't have to go through the Ontario law school system. It's basically through our own internal system, which makes it a lot easier for you because we have access to your transcripts and all of that. We ask for what they call a letter of motivation, which is really just tell us why you want to study here. And that's not pro forma. So take a moment to think about it before you write it, because sometimes that can make a difference if you're on the borderline. What do I mean by the borderline? Well, we have a 6.0 GPA minimum entry. Now, that doesn't mean if you're at 5.8, we don't let you in, but that's where we look at other aspects of your file. Some aspects include your letter. If there's something compelling in your letter, you know, we're not going to, or after all, we're not civilists. We're not going to say, oh, it's 5.91. Sorry, go away. Right? We're not like that. We really do, as James has said, we're kind of contextual. That's the way the common law works. And so, of course, I'm joking about my civilian friends. So that's one aspect. Another aspect can be, well, we look at your transcripts. For example, maybe the reason you're below our minimum threshold is because your first year was a disaster. And it's not uncommon. After all, many graduates begin droit civil sometimes at 18 years old, right? I mean, what 18-year-old really has a clue? So we recognize that. If there's an upward trend, we say, well, look, you know, we're not going to punish this person because in the first year they had a rough time, but they've obviously figured out life is about growth. And so that would be another reason why the hard 6.0 is not quite a hard 6.0. What it really allows us to do is manage our numbers. And 6.0 has been that special number where we say, look, it's a B. It means that they've graduated with certainly a threshold, and we can be comfortable bringing them to the next level. So that would be the date as early as December. Now, obviously, you won't have your final grade, so it's not like we can accept you formally. What we can do, however, is give you a conditional acceptance, and we've done that as early as January for people who have pretty strong packages. And you know, if you are running with an 8 GPA consistently, we are not too concerned that suddenly you're going to get a 1 GPA in your final term, right? So we're pretty comfortable saying, historically, this is not a problem. We'll give you conditional acceptance. Of course, it's conditional on you getting your LLL because we can't accept you without it. And a related point about that is if you look on our website, our common law JD website, we do tell you the courses you must also have in order to be accepted. So even if you have a 9 GPA, if you don't have admin law, droit administratif, you cannot be accepted, which means either if it's just one course you're missing, we might allow you in and you must take that course during your JD. But if it's more than that, it's a problem. And the reason, again, is not that we are so rules-based that it's a check or no check. It's that part of why we are permitted to give you a JD in 8 months is that our governing bodies say, well, if they have taken an LLL or droit civil degree, and that degree covers what we would call Section 91 courses, then it's like they did those Section 91 courses. Here I'm thinking criminal law, constitutional law, in our program, because in principle, whether you learn constitutional law in droit civil or in the common law, one hopes that teaching methods aside, the content is more or less the same. So that's why we have some of those absolute requirements for your degree. And I know it is my understanding that you can graduate with an LLL without taking or completing or passing all of those what we deem mandatory courses. So bear that in mind. You can start as early as December, and technically we will accept long into the year, but I would say generally by June, we know what our class looks like. So don't wait until your final notes come out, your final grades come out. And let me just speak about that for a moment. I know some students would say, gosh, I'm right on the border, but I know my last term is going to push me above, and so I'm going to wait for that. Don't do that. If you really are close to the border, then tell us in your letter, and we'll be looking for your final grades. But if you wait too long, what can happen is if we have filled all our spots, we might decide that's it. We're not going above this, because we do have limits. We like to keep the class manageable, which means if we have 100 applicants who could pass and get in, we're not going to take all 100 because we just don't have the ability to. So don't risk that you might be part of that final, those last few students who, even though you might qualify, we might have to say, I'm sorry, not this year.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights into the strategy involved with requesting admission, because it's often questions that I get from students, and I can't answer because I'm not part of the admissions committee. I'm not the one making those decisions, and so that's very, very helpful. One question that just popped up for me, actually, and maybe James, you can share a little bit about your experience regarding that. But I'm aware that we're mostly conversing in English here. The national program is a bilingual program. From your perspective, how, what level of English knowledge would be required for students to feel like they can be successful studying in this program? So for someone whose first language is French, for example, is it a mostly English program? How does it work, or how has it been for you so far?
Well, I would say, well, given that it really depends on how you go through the program, right? So if you try to immerse yourself in English, it'll be more English. But if you want to do more French, you can do almost the whole thing in French, save for a few mandatory courses like that are done exclusively in English. So, it depends, right? So if you go the immersion route, which is what I did in droit civil, it's going to be fairly difficult. Like if your level of fluency in English is not close to bilingual. I mean, you don't have to be fully bilingual, like they say functional, but as I think many Anglophones learn in droit civil, your level of comprehension needs to be quite far up there. So I would say I wouldn't discourage people from entering into the program if they're a bit worried about it, because you'll learn. Like I did in droit civil, like I was an Anglophone, and I polished my French, and I did fairly well. But at the same time, just know that you need to be fairly, I would say fluently bilingual. But anyways, that's a question that varies for everyone. So the situation, anyways.
Professor Debsis, do you have anything to add to that in particular?
I think James is right, and I think it's up to the student has a lot of control. You get to select a lot of your own courses, which means if you'd rather take them in French, do them all in French, except for a few of the courses that may be in English. That changes year to year. It's really dependent on our faculty's availability. So torts might be in French one year, might be in English, the same for property. Other than that, you can have control over it. And don't forget that as a truly bilingual university, you can always write your exams in whichever language you like.
Super intéressant, les opportunités qui sont présentées par le fait d'étudier à une université bilingue. C'est superbe. Donc, peut-être qu'on peut s'arrêter ici pour le moment pour les questions à notre panel. Et puis, j'inviterai les étudiants à lever la main pour poser des questions. C'est vraiment, je pense, une bonne opportunité d'avoir le directeur du programme ici avec nous aujourd'hui et puis un étudiant qui étudie en ce moment dans le programme. Donc, n'hésitez pas si vous avez des questions, soit lever la main ou les inscrire dans le chat. Puis, je constate que Yulia, tu as une autre question, alors vas-y.
Merci. Oui, ma question porte sur les cours, puis elle a deux volets. Premièrement, je voulais savoir si les cours, on les fait avec les gens qui sont dans le programme de Common Law, du GD, en tant que tel. Et deuxièmement, je voulais savoir, peut-être que vous n'avez pas la réponse tout de suite, mais par rapport à la pandémie, est-ce que vous prévoyez un retour complet en personne l'année prochaine?
So first of all, our mandatory courses, you're in your cohort only, the national program students. And one of the reasons we have done this, and at one point we did it the other way, where everything was fully integrated, is that we recognize that for these mandatory courses, you are already coming in with some information. So I'll use contracts, which is a course I teach. I do appreciate what you know in droit civil and what you don't know. And so I also teach contract law to our first year JDs. The course is different. There's a lot that's the same, but I will focus more with the national program students on where these differences exist and less on where the similarities lie, because I don't need to spend as much time on that. Whereas with a JD who's never learned anything, everything is new to them. So that's why we make our mandatory courses, you guys are all together. But for all those other courses, which is nearly 50% of your courses, you are just like all the other JD students. You have to try to get into the course, and then there's no distinction. Nobody says, well, you're a national program JD. You're just a JD student in a JD course. So I think that was your first question. What was your second question?
If we're going back in person next year, yeah.
Yeah, well, of course, like everything, it's fluid. We are beholden to health regulations and laws, but having said that, our university has taken the position, as has our faculty, that we intend to be fully in person in the fall of 2022.
Merci.
Fingers crossed, conditions permitting, we'll all be able to see each other in the hallways again. That would be really exciting. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? J'ai rien qui est entré dans le chat, n'hésitez pas.
Well, let me just maybe mention something else while we're waiting for a question about a question that I get often, and it's usually in the month of May, when somebody has finally decided to get themselves organized and apply. And now they want an answer yesterday. That's not going to work. The longer you wait, the longer it's going to take to get you an answer. And so often the question has questions behind it. I can kind of read between the lines. Here's a student who's now starting to wonder, should I do the barreau or should I do this? And sometimes, or should I try to get into an LLM program? And they're really putting off that decision to a point where now getting answers, time matters quite a bit because you have to make decisions. So don't be one of those students. When we give you an offer, you don't have to immediately accept. You can sometimes put it off, and we will eventually send you a note saying, hey, you have to give us an answer by a certain date, otherwise we're giving away your spot. But you're in a much better position than waiting until it's too late and then putting in your application and hoping for an answer yesterday. So I've noticed that over the years. And I always think it's a shame that these students are now adding pressure on themselves. reduce pressure.
Great, thank you. So question about the January term that doesn't exist in the droit civil section. So from what we understand, it's a condensed January term. It's like 2.5 weeks long. Is that still the case for the national program?
Yes. Again, you're part of our JD program. You have a January term. It's one course for January, and then we start a third term, what we call the winter term.
Yeah, so there's 3 terms, fall, January, and winter, which is a little bit different from what you might be accustomed to here. So a little bit of a question about job prospects, and that's something that I can assist with as well. Donc, pour des étudiants qui auraient des questions par rapport à vos opportunités sur le marché du travail suite à avoir complété votre JD, peut-être même comparativement aux étudiants qui ont fait le programme classique de 3 ans de JD, mettons. J'ai souvent des questions par rapport à ça, puis j'ai des choses à vous partager. Donc, je vous encouragerais, là, si vous voulez me faire part de votre situation, si vous avez des inquiétudes spécifiques en lien avec ça, je peux vous donner des idées ayant travaillé là, au Centre des carrières en Common Law également avec des étudiants au JD pendant 5 à 6 ans, donc n'hésitez pas. But I'm wondering as well if James or Professor Damesis, you have anything to share regarding job prospects for national program graduates, especially, you know, and if there's any differences in job prospects after articling or even in terms of finding an articling position compared to students who would have studied the full 3-year JD.
I guess I'll go first, but on my side, I can't really comment on the recruitment process just because I'm still going through it, and because of like just exigent circumstances, I'm still, you know, applying and making, you know, getting my materials together. So I think maybe Professor Damesis would be more equipped to answer this question.
Yeah, and this year in particular, owing to the pandemic, the deadlines were pushed a little bit. So in a way, it benefited the national program students because some of the job, you know, the time when these jobs are made available and interviews happen is a little bit later. I suppose it also relates, though, to why you should try to get your applications in early, because some of these periods start in the summer, and it's fine to apply for a job when you've been accepted, because then you get to tell the prospective employer, I am in the JD program, I will complete it at this date, and so I can start working in the summer immediately after, if that's what you need. Versus if you are not accepted, you can't really apply for those jobs because, of course, the first item they'll look is, well, they don't even have a JD. So that also speaks to trying to get your applications in early. I know, Jennifer, the website will have, and James, you mentioned the source has these dates, but as I said, I think this year the dates changed. I don't know if those dates will stay changed for next year, which makes your life a bit easier, or if you have to really get on top of it to make sure you're in the right cycle of jobs.
James, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, because for whatever reason, it just slipped my mind, but I did apply to the summer recruitment process, but without any common law grades. I didn't get any callbacks, so you can apply, but I was even warned by someone at the common law CPP that, you know, it's less than likely that you'll get a position. But it's not to say, you know, maybe some of you have very, you know, very stellar backgrounds and may get offers, but just that with no common law grades and a French transcript, I think, you know, doesn't really play in our favor. But by all means, do that and you know, try to sell, you know, the program and who you are. So you never know.
And if I can also add, there are tons of law firms that don't participate in the official recruitment period. Lots of firms, you know, it's an interesting market right now. They don't really have to advertise. They might put a few ads very softly out there. But I think at this point, you need to be a little proactive, whatever that is compared to just being active, but you need to go out and find those opportunities. And what I've noticed is that very often when students just call a law firm and say, do you guys need a job, need somebody to work? they'll say, sure, come in for an interview. Let's see. So don't just think, well, the only jobs available are the ones, those official posted ones. Calling law firms really helps. And also that's where that student proposed internship opportunity really works well, because now they get to see you, and students have received jobs following those internships because for 140 hours, a law firm gets to see what you're like. And if they like you, it's a very easy sell.
Yeah, and what James and Professor Damesis are referring to when they talk about the round of jobs that become available sort of this summer before you even start your JD studies, that's often referred to as the structured or the organized articling recruitment process. It happens a year before you start articling. It's only a small number of employers that participate in this process across the country. And so it's by no means all the opportunities for articling that are out there. It's some opportunities that, become available around that time. You will, if you're admitted to the program, you will receive more information about that process, and then you can make an informed decision about whether or not you want to participate or not. I would say that only about a third of students who are eligible to article in a given year are going to find jobs in this structured or organized way. Most of the time, what happens, as Professor Damesis mentioned, is that you rely and exercise your networking skills, and you build connections, and you put yourself out there, and you market yourself and your JD and your licence, and you market that to employers. And there's ways of doing that and getting coaching to maximize your opportunities. So absolutely, if we the Career Center can support you in achieving that as well. So Yulia, we'll go to your question, and then I have a couple of questions in the chat that I'd like to get to.
Do you want to take care of these? Since I've asked so many already, you can just start with them. I'd like if you want.
Sure, no worries. And it might end up being the same thing, because I'm getting a lot of sort of similar questions around timing of things. And I get these questions in individual appointments as well. So for a student that's currently studying in the licence and considering maybe the JD, or maybe even doing an LLM, and potentially l'école du barreau and a stage du barreau, is there, from your perspective, an advantage to doing things in a certain order, or does that really come down to a personal preference? So for someone who might do, École du Barreau, get called as a lawyer and then do the JD or an LLM, or do an LLM and then go back to do the JD, or do the JD and then go and get called. So I'm wondering if you have any perspectives on that.
So I think it's mostly a personal decision. I will say that years ago, where timing was a little bit different, I was noticing a strategy that students would use, which is they were writing their barreau exams right before basically the JD would start. So they accepted their JD to guard against the risk that they failed their exam. And so now, even if they failed their barreau exam, they could rewrite them, hopefully successfully. But if that didn't work out, they haven't, I don't want to use the word waste, but they haven't lost that time. They've still got this JD. So that's a very particular type of strategy, which I'm not sure applies anymore, because I believe the barreau dates for exams have changed. So with that strategy, I could have understood it. These days, I think what you really want to think about is this. Do you still want to be a student, or do you want to be a lawyer? Because it's really hard to go back and forth. Once you've started to work, the thought of then saying, all right, now I'm going to stop getting this income and go become a student again, it's difficult for a multitude of reasons. So sometimes it might just make more sense, stick it out for one more year of being a student, and then let me go and work. And that's it. School is done, life begins. Of course, I'm speaking generally, but yeah, so I would say that's why it's more of a personal choice. With, of course, exceptions exist.
Great, thank you. And that's certainly along the lines of my thinking as well is, making that decision and evaluating your life circumstances in the moment and thinking about whether you need to start paying the bills sooner than later, or if you're still very much comfortable in student mode and continuing along that path for a while. Julia.
Oui, merci. J'aurais deux questions qui ne sont pas très reliées l'une avec l'autre, là, donc je vais vous poser les deux. J'en profite parce qu'il n'y a pas l'air d'en avoir énormément, donc donc je vais vous les poser. J'aimerais vous entendre plus sur toute la question du Mooting Program. J'ai vu sur le site que vous avez plein d'opportunités super intéressantes par rapport à ça et également nous, en droit civil, on appelle ça l'enseignement clinique, donc le cours comme qu'on peut faire au sein d'un milieu juridique. Moi, en ce moment, je le fais à la Cour supérieure, donc c'est super intéressant, puis j'adore ça, donc j'aimerais ça peut-être le faire l'année prochaine aussi. Est-ce que c'est possible de faire les moots et ça, ou il faut choisir entre les deux, puis comment ça se passe? Est-ce que vous nous aidez à trouver ces positions-là dans les cabinets d'avocats, par exemple, ou est-ce que c'est possible de le faire au tribunal à Ottawa? Comment ça se passe?
Yes. So first, mooting. I'm happy I could talk forever about mooting. I'm also the mooting director, and I coach a couple of our teams, in particular the ones that have won the most tournaments of any university on the planet, which we're very, very proud to say, the largest moots. So our program is pretty rigorous insofar as we have a reputation and we want to keep it. You're all eligible to try out for our moot teams, and we have moots in a variety of areas, from business law, family law, constitutional law, criminal law. We really do try to hit almost every area, torts law as well. So once you're on one of our moot teams, you for the most part, it becomes your January term course. So January is devoted to a big chunk of the mooting. Of course, any of you who know a bit about mooting know that moots start in the fall and bleed into the winter. But because of our special January term, and because most moots have a lot of work in the form of written submissions due in January, our January term was seen as the right place to park those 3 credits. But it's a year-long commitment. We have sessions for all our moot teams throughout the year where we give them lectures on different topics, and that's in addition to whatever your personal coaches are doing as well. So it's a pretty comprehensive program. And I will tell you, many of our graduates are in some very good positions in firms, and they often, when we have our sessions on mooting, tell our students, mooting is the #1 thing they look for when they're trying to hire someone. This is, of course, litigation or litigation-focused firms, but even non-litigation, because the training that they know we give, being as rigorous as it is, they feel very comfortable that they're now getting a student who knows how to write a lot better than most, and knows how to think probably better than a lot, and how to express themselves better than many. So for them, it's an easy sell. On your second question, where you use clinics, let's just distinguish between clinics and internships, which they can certainly look the same, but we kind of separate them a bit. We have clinics like our legal aid clinic. We have lots of those clinics. And of course, you can join one of those clinics. It's usually in the form of a course. So again, it's 3 credits and you have to apply for it. And then we have our internships, and that falls into 2 more categories. Ones that we already have in place. And what that really means is we have relationships with firms or lawyers who have done this before. But we also have the second category where you can go out and find one, and I just have to approve it. And in approving it, I'm looking for some basics, that your supervisor is a JD, is a common law lawyer, and that the work you're going to do is not about fetching coffee, but is actually about learning something about the law.
Merci. Puis to continue on the question, when do we have to apply for these? Do we apply when we start the program or during the summer before? Do you?
Yeah. No, it is when you start the program. Our moot tryouts, for example, happen in September. So Droit Civil does its moots in, I don't know, February or something. We wait until September. So from that perspective, it's perfect for national program students. You're exactly at the same time as everyone else. And then those internships, you can certainly apply in advance and then just set them. And we allow you to say, I want to do it in September, in January, or winter.
Thank you.
Super, merci beaucoup. Une question de Brian.
Hi, just two quick questions. One was, when I read on the website, the program has a sole intake of every September, right? Because I'm anticipating that I'll finish my civil law degree in December 2023. So that would mean that there's no winter entry. And then my second question was just that I'm an Anglophone, so I have no problem taking courses in English. So the question is, in the mixture of the courses in a typical year, is it like half in English, half in French? What's the mixture? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, so to your first question, you're right. We do full year or 8-month terms. We don't accept people in December. And again, that was for a couple of reasons. Mostly we wanted to keep that cohort in one shot, and it makes for reducing some complications. So that's September. Unfortunately, that's what it is. As far as the other question, we only have up to 5, I think it is. We've changed over the years, depending on courses, but roughly maximum 5, sometimes it's only 4 mandatory courses. Those ones typically fall into a 3-to-2 or 2-to-2 ratio. So if I'm reading between the lines, if you would rather have all your courses in English, the 10 courses that you'll have to take to get your degree, you could probably do 8 of them in English, and maybe only 2 of them would have to be in French. But that ratio of 3-to-2 or 2-to-2, depending on which ones become mandatory from year to year, is pretty consistent, but it's never guaranteed because it's dependent on availability of faculty. Does that answer the questions?
Excellent. Thank you, Brian, for those questions. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? On s'en vient tranquillement à la fin de la session, mais peut-être qu'on aurait le temps pour une autre question avant de quitter. Ricky, allez-y.
Yes, hi. Thank you for the presentation. It's greatly appreciated. My question is about, I will be graduating in technically in April 2022, so next year in the LLL program. I am debating right now to choose between the University of Sherbrooke and the University of Ottawa for the JD, because they have a program that's offered on 2 summers, so I can start right away in the month of May, or I can wait, until September and start with the JD program at Ottawa. Both programs are, 8 months, and it's just going to be a question of whether I want to start early summer versus September. So my question to you, I'm sure you are the director of the program and you're very familiar with other universities that offer these kind of programs. What is sort of the biggest advantage or defining factor that I should consider to make my choice?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. And like I said, I am not, I don't want to disparage any other program. So whatever I say here, put it in the lens of I have no interest in saying, oh, we're better than Sherbrooke just because we're better. I would say, to respond to your questions, is this really. What do you want to do with your JD? Do you want to use your JD to work in a common law world? If so, for me, it's an easy answer why you'd want to come to Ottawa, because we are a true JD faculty. The profs that you can take courses with are in some cases literally the ones who've written the book on the topics that you're taking. For example, Professor Van Duzer has written certainly the best, if not the leading, book on business organizations. So when you take that course and Professor Van Duzer is your prof, it makes a pretty big difference when you get out into the real world. You also have the contacts, right? I mean, I get so many emails from students when they're out in practice saying, oh my God, this contract issue has come up. Blah, blah, blah. And if I don't know the answer, which I should know, then at least I know who else to point them to. So not only that, but as you start making, so of course you have your cohort, but given that you're going to be taking courses with other JD students, your network of JD, so future common law lawyers, is expanding. And for you may not know this now or appreciate it, but most of your contacts that you make in law school is what leads to opportunities in your future. So Ricky, to come full circle, if what you want to do with your JD is work in a JD world, for me, it's an easy decision. On the other hand, if all you want is just a JD to put as a couple of letters next to your name, you are just going to work in Quebec and you never really care about the JD world, then do what's most convenient.
My objective is actually, I work in the field of immigration for the past 6-7 years. And the next step for me, I mean, taking the program at LLL made me realize that I'm really interested in the field of criminal law. So I would like to combine criminal and immigration law, which are both federal jurisdictions. And obviously, the most of the jurisprudence come from the common law side. So that is where I'm headed. And eventually my plan is to do the Ontario bar and hopefully create some kind of bridge between Quebec and Ontario where I can, hopefully practice in 2 jurisdictions. And I know that you mentioned that for Quebec, it's 4 exams that I would have to do eventually. This is if ever I decide for that. I'm perfectly bilingual. I have no problem in terms of languages and everything. I have no issues with that. So now, given this extra information, what would be the thought process for you? I mean, for someone that would like to practice, in Ontario and do the Ontario bar.
Yeah, well, in particular, as you may know far better than I do, the criminal bar is a particular bar. And by that, I mean criminal lawyers are a breed of their own, and it's a very tight-knit community here, certainly in Ottawa, and I suspect the same in Toronto. And so as somebody who is trying to get their foot into the criminal bar, if you don't have any connections with, again, what I would call real JD people, I think it would be a barrier to entry because it's a tight-knit bar. They know each other. They know where people have studied. They know who they studied with. For example, a lot of our criminal law profs who teach particular areas of criminal law are practicing criminal lawyers from Ottawa. We have some of the best in the country. So if that's your path, I would definitely think about, will you gain easy entry into the Ontario criminal bar from a university that really isn't known as a JD faculty or not?
Thank you very much.
Some great points and elements to consider. And for those of you who might be considering national program at Sherbrooke or other institutions, I am sure it's unfortunate that Sarah couldn't be with us today to offer her perspective, but I am sure she would be available to speak with you. And so you can always send me an email and I can put you in touch with Sarah if you would like to get her perspective. Donc, je pense que c'est probablement un bon moment de terminer la séance. Je veux remercier vivement professeur DM6 et puis James d'avoir été parmi nous aujourd'hui. Je pense que vos perspectives ont été vraiment là, fantastiques. Donc, merci d'avoir pris le temps. Merci d'avoir accepté qu'on enregistre la session également pour les étudiants super occupés qui n'ont pas pu être parmi nous aujourd'hui. Et puis, je remercie les participants aussi, les étudiantes et les étudiants qui se sont joints à nous puis qui ont pris la peine de poser d'excellentes questions également.
Jennifer, I think Ricky has another question.
He has a second question.
Up and down. Yeah. We're not charging by the question, are we?
Thank you very much. It's a good question. I know when you mentioned cohort and you mentioned that all of the students are going to follow the same pattern of courses, I was wondering, is it, because I know there's 2 ways to offer these courses. For example, we take, as I'm doing right now with LLL, we take 5 classes and all of these 5 classes are offered, every day. I know there's also another way of teaching. I know at Sherbrooke, that's one of the things that was very interesting, is that they do 1 class at a time. So they do the first 5 weeks for 1 class for torts. And then once all of the students finish it, then they go for the next class and next class and next class. And I was just wondering, what is the format at the JD program?
Because you're going to mix with other JDs for other courses, we just follow a regular course program. So it's not 1 course after, it's one of 5 courses in the fall, one course in January and 4 courses in the winter. And that's how you get your 10 courses.
And the winter, you when you say winter, you're talking about January being winter as well, right?
No, that's January. Our winter is, I think this year it's January 31 until the April exam period, but basically February till April is our winter term.
Oh, okay. And then the one class that you mentioned, that's going to be the month of January.
That's right. And that's most courses run every day for 3 weeks and 2 days.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. It's very clear. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Donc, going once, going twice. OK, donc c'est la fin de la session. Merci encore à tout le monde de votre participation active aujourd'hui. Bonne journée à tous, bonne continuité. Restez au chaud, mettez vos tucs et vos mitaines parce que l'hiver arrive. Au revoir.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thanks for having us.